Homeless, Hatori was auctioned off as an item. Wait, this sounds like a classic old-school romance novel opening. I've heard it's cliché. Let's see for ourselves. Exciting. Chained, Hatori was taken to the auction site where, besides humans and goods, there were non-human beings as well. The auction attendees, including a cloaked figure who quietly put away his staff, had also arrived. Unconcerned about who would purchase her, Hatori just wanted a place to belong. As the auction's most valuable item, the bidding escalated until a cloaked sorcerer appeared, causing a stir. Known as the strongest sorcerer in the magical world and rarely seen, he made a high bid for Hatori, intending to make her his apprentice. The sorcerer won Hatori for 5 million pounds. The auctioneer reminded him of the rules, but the sorcerer ignored him, grabbed Hatori by the collar, and told her to stand tall and look forward without bowing. He then used the lounge area. The auctioneer wondered aloud if the sorcerer was a monster, noting his skull-like appearance. Another cautioned him to be careful, as the sorcerer could hear everything. Indeed, the sorcerer was a genuine, though rare, practitioner of his craft. Leaving the basement with Hatori, the sorcerer asked if she could see floating creatures. Someone remarked that Hatori was the knight's beloved child, capable of seeing things others couldn't, which made her feared as a monster. Revealing his name as Iriasu, the sorcerer acknowledged Hatori's unique sight as fortunate, though it had caused her to be ostracized and not sent to an orphanage due to shame, while others deemed her unlucky and called her a freak. Hatori felt she had no luck at all, but Iriasu promised to make her feel fortunate. Embracing her, he conjured thorns, and when Hatori opened her eyes, they were in front of a wooden cabin in a forest. Iriasu declared it his home, and now hers too. They were in a village on the western border of London, England. Iriasu destroyed her collar, declaring her his apprentice from that day. Sorcery was real, but nearly extinct and outdated. He was pleased to have Hatori as his apprentice. Like a kitten, Hatori was taken by Iriasu to freshen up, without a chance to refuse, fully exposed and sensitive during her adolescence. Yet, unexpectedly, she enjoyed a good bath, having previously contemplated suicide, dissuaded only by the auctioneer. While bathing, Hatori saw a fairy appear. The fairies shared how humans refer to them, but expressed a hope that Hatori would call them friendly neighbors. They were also surprised that the sorcerer, Iriasu, had chosen the knight's beloved child as his apprentice. It seems Hatori's nature is unusual and popular among the fairy and sprite races. They promised to help her fully if she decided to become a sorcerer, considering her the darling of the night. Iriasu called Hatori to come eat. There was a beautiful blonde Gothic maid at home. Hearing that Hatori had seen a fairy, Iriasu mentioned that it was Ariel. He demonstrated his magic by summoning a firebird and remarked on his good fortune in finding the knight's beloved child as an apprentice. Hatori was curious about what exactly the knight's beloved child was. Iriasu explained it as similar to a queen bee, attracting and capturing various beings like fairies or creatures, regardless of whether they could see the queen bee. Being able to see fairies made Hatori a rarity among the knight's beloved children. These beings bring both misfortune and fortune to her, as their closeness is not entirely friendly to humans, but having their favor naturally makes using magic easy. Thus, Hatori could definitely become an excellent sorcerer. Iriasu would not make arbitrary demands on Hatori, but emphasized that she was already part of his family, and it was okay for her to be a bit spoiled occasionally. He also gave her a natural magic stone matching the color of her eyes for protection. The maid, Silky, took Hatori back to her room to rest. Hatori was surprised by the soft bed and fell asleep smelling the scent of grass. She was awakened by a knock on the window, finding Ariel, whom she had met earlier, wanting to take her for a walk in the forest. Feeling its goodwill, Hatori went along for the walk. Iriasu saw this and silently put on his cloak, considering it a lesson for Hatori. Ariel led Hatori deep into the forest, expressing fondness and closeness in his words. When Hatori realized they were too far and decided to return, Ariel argued that she had no family or anyone waiting for her, suggesting she live in the fairy realm for a happier life. Surprisingly, Hatori pinched her hand until it bled. While she once had no one who needed her, Iriasu had offered her a place to stay, saying even if she were discarded after being used as a toy, she wouldn't regret it. Ieyasu had called her family, which made her very happy. Unexpectedly, Ieyasu appeared beside her, remarking that his good apprentice remembered where her home was. Ariel was angry, wondering how Ieyasu found them. It turned out the magic stone Ieyasu gave Hatori also functioned as a bell for location tracking. Ieyasu decided to let them go this time, but warned of consequences for next time. Ariel felt he failed to protect the knight's beloved child. Hatori thought she would be scolded, but Ieyasu simply patted her head and explained that most fairies use sweet words to lure others, advising her to be cautious. He admitted his own responsibility for not informing her earlier and expressed a wish for Hatori to rely on him more. However, Hatori noticed Ieyasu's body was stiff, and the next second, he lifted her to treat a wound on her leg, joking that he couldn't let his future wife have a scar. Confused about who the wife was, Ieyasu revealed he bought Hatori as an apprentice but planned to marry her when she grew up, jesting about the traditional practice of raising a child bride, which he acknowledged as problematic. After her mother suicided, saying birthing her was a mistake, Hatori didn't care who bought her at the auction as long as it didn't hurt. The auctioneer called her a treasure and noticed her despair. Waking up to see her hand bandaged, Silky, holding clothes, came in and helped her dress before taking her to Ieyasu and quickly starting breakfast. Ieyasu mentioned that Silky was a fairy who permanently lived in the house, responsible for cooking, laundry, and cleaning. The clothes Hatori wore were also prepared by Silky, making her seem more like the house's master rather than a maid. Ieyasu's letter turned into a paper bird and flew away, which he said was for a friend. Hatori still remembers that he wanted to take her as his apprentice and marry her. She isn't sure which was his original intention. She found out she had been asleep for 2 days, probably because she was very tired before. She doesn't know much about Ieyasu's character or appearance, but thinks he must not be a bad person since he takes care of her. Just after she started eating, Ieyasu suggested preparing for a honeymoon trip since she was awake. Hatori was stunned by his strange way of speaking, but soon found herself taken to the train station. They went shopping, and Ieyasu introduced her to a friend. Hatori thought about Ieyasu's skull face, unsure how much was serious and how much was a joke. Then he changed his face to a human one, saying he couldn't go out with a skull face. He even changed his touch and temperature, which Hatori commented on as feeling fake, leaving Ieyasu a bit offended. He took her to a magic bookstore where they met Angelica. Angelica was surprised that Hatori was Ieyasu's apprentice and worried that Hatori might have been abducted through some dubious means. She even asked Hatori if anything strange had happened to her. Caught in thought, Hatori asked if being stripped and proposed to count it as strange. Angelica, smiling, turned around and punched Ieyasu, scolding him for being a perverse sorcerer and lacking common sense. She was, however, surprised that Ieyasu truly intended to take an apprentice and propose marriage. Inside the house, there were many small fairies. Angelica revealed she was also a sorcerer on the brink of extinction and a member of the Sorcerers' Technical Research Association. She usually made magical tools that use magic instead of electricity as a power source. She also had a daughter with some magical talent, but didn't want her daughter to end up like her, struggling to make money. Angelica also explained the difference between magic and illusion. Illusionists manipulate what is known as the science of magic, while sorcerers use the power of fairies or spirits to interfere with the laws of the world and cause miracles. However, magic is not easy to control, and mistakes can affect the body, like how part of Angelica's hand had crystallized. Angelica advised her to study seriously and not repeat her mistakes. A small fairy kept acting spoiled beside Hatori, who asked if she could use magic. Angelica encouraged her to try and summon her familiar, Hugo, who recognized Hatori as the knight's beloved child. Hugo, a water spirit, was very diligent when working. Angelica gave Hatori a crystal and told her to imagine her favorite flower and try to change the crystal through her imagination. Hatori quickly understood how to resonate with the crystal. She remembered seeing a sea of flowers with her mother as a child, followed by her mother's suicide. Thankfully, Ieyasu covered her eyes in time. When Hatori recovered, she found a sea of crystal flowers at her feet. Angelica looked very upset, leading Hatori to apologize. Angelica questioned Ieyasu about Hatori's situation. Ieyasu then confessed that Hatori was the knight's beloved child, a fact he had kept secret. Although Hugo knew the truth, He hadn't told Angelica because of the special significance the knight's beloved child held for fairies. Angelica wasn't angry at Hatori, but blamed Ieyasu for not informing her earlier. She asked Hatori to help fetch cleaning tools, and then told Ieyasu that he would have to pay more. When Hatori returned, Angelica had already prepared new materials, ready to make Hatori a set of equipment. Hatori saw her and Hugo, the water spirit, weaving a beautiful feather garment together. Hatori stared at the crystal flowers she had formed until she received the equipment and left with Ieyasu. On their way back, Ieyasu asked her if she liked poppies. Hatori wasn't sure, as she only remembered seeing a sea of poppies. "Were you traveling to the Golden Triangle?" Ieyasu inquired, aware that Hatori had visited with her mother. He then asked about her family situation and told her that regardless of her past or family, it wouldn't change her current reality since she now had a new home. Hatori mentioned that her father's whereabouts were unknown, but her mother had died in front of her, although she had moved past it. As they arrived at the doorstep, they saw Ieyasu's friend. He remarked that Ieyasu was usually a homebody, and wondered why Ieyasu went out as soon as he arrived. Silky, however, didn't want to let him in, denying him even the privilege to enter. This man, named Simon, was the village priest and was busy with both priest and pastor duties. He confessed his fear of magic and his vulnerable state. At that moment, Silky brought sandwiches for Hatori, holding her protectively and eyeing Simon with disdain, clearly disliking him. Hatori noticed that a fairy from Angelica's house had followed her home. Simon mentioned that he knew about Hatori and told her that if she ever felt overwhelmed by Ieyasu, the church would always welcome her. Simon then produced 3 letters that humans couldn't solve, requiring a sorcerer's intervention. These were also to punish Ieyasu for his unilateral actions, having silently taken an apprentice after decades of silence, for which he still had to report to his superiors. Ieyasu stated that he was not under the church's control, although the church did not want to get involved either. It was just a mutual constraint. Ieyasu commented that it had been several hundred years, and his superiors should update their perceptions. Hatori worried that these troubles were because of her, but Simon assured her they were not her fault and involved many issues. He also needed to get medicine from Ieyasu, hoping Hatori would become a skilled sorcerer, thus producing gentle and effective medicine. He emphasized that England was already accustomed to the presence of magic. Ieyasu suggested they could handle affairs while also taking a honeymoon trip, the first stop being Iceland to see active dragons. Hatori was shocked that dragons still existed, only to be snatched away by a dragon the next moment. The blonde man riding the dragon took her to the land where dragons end. Just a moment ago, Hatori was discussing dragons with Ieyasu. Like sorcerers, dragons are nearly extinct, with the few remaining managed in Iceland. Most have a tame disposition. However, neither of them expected a dragon to suddenly snatch Hatori away. A blonde man remarked that although Ieyasu is powerful, he often lets his guard down, joking that he had now lost his apprentice. He pointed towards a great rift valley ahead, known as the dragon's final resting place, some resembling dinosaurs in appearance. After landing, the dragon reluctantly released Hatori. Commanded to let go, Hatori fell into a pool. Surprisingly, Hatori did not seek help to climb out. Previously, she might have just waited to die, but knowing Ieyasu was waiting, she struggled to the shore. There, she encountered a massive rhinoceros-like dragon, blind from age, but attracted to the scent of fresh grass on her. It liked the fragrance. Lindell introduced the dragon as an ilu, a parent of the forest. Its decaying body nurtures the greenery of the earth. Lindell had abducted Hatori because a wind fairy had spread the news of Ieyasu taking an apprentice, and he had followed them, disguised. Lindell, known as the Song of the White Flower, and Ieyasu, called the Thorn of Shadow, had known each other for 300 years. Lindell warned Ieyasu that Hatori was nearly frozen. Ieyasu quickly wrapped her up and summoned a fire spirit to dry her clothes while Lindell chuckled, teasing him for acting grown up. Ieyasu introduced Lindell as the keeper of the dragon nest and a sorcerer like himself, tasked with magically concealing the Rift Valley. Despite his youthful appearance, Lindell was much older than Ieyasu and still playful. Some young dragons insisted on playing with Hatori, while Lindell and Ieyasu discussed recent frequent dragon appearances, linked to food shortages in the valley. While playing with the young dragons until they fell asleep, Hatori enjoyed the warmth of their company. As the old dragon slept, Hatori approached, feeling its weathered skin. The dragon woke up, alerting the young ones, who said that their uncle dragon was returning to nature. They mentioned becoming beautiful trees or grass after their time, revealing that the lush valley was filled with dragon remains. Unlike humans, the dragons embraced death as a part of life's freedom. Hatori, touching the moss on the dragon, asked if it hurt. The dragon, recognizing her gentleness, spoke of life's fairness on Earth, with every species facing death. Having lived a long time, it was ready to pass on life to the next generation. Hatori need not grieve. She said she couldn't do that. She had once thought of jumping to understand life. The old dragon told her that the living should not envy the dead. Hatori doesn't need to fly since she cannot. If Ariasu hadn't met Hatori, he wouldn't know whom to choose as an apprentice. The old dragon saw Hatori's memories. It said that Hatori, who cannot fly, should experience the real joy of flying. It mentioned it no longer had the strength to fly, but it could use its power to show Hatori the joy of flying. Hatori closed her eyes and found herself soaring in the air. In the distance were the sea and the glow of the sunset. It was too dazzling and warm. The old dragon soared with her in the sky. Lindell and Ariasu watched. He said the old dragon was giving Hatori one last dream. Now, the generations of dragons are changing faster. The old dragon is from the old era. If Hatori becomes a sorcerer, she might be the last generation of sorcerers. Ariasu is worried about this. The magic power in Hatori's body flowed into the old dragon during the dream. The knight's beloved child's immense magic sometimes harms herself. She still doesn't know how to control her power. Lindell told Ariasu to teach Hatori how to control her magic. Otherwise, Hatori won't survive 3 years. He insisted Hatori must not leave his side. There are already many rumors about Hatori in the magical world. After all, the knight's beloved child is a coveted being. Ariasu cannot bear to let her go. Lindell also hopes Hatori will grow well. The old dragon told Hatori, "They fly in the sky to find the meaning of life." Hatori understood its message, but she found that a large tree suddenly grew from the old dragon's body. The old dragon was very grateful to Hatori. Because of her power, it could fly in the last moment of its life. Recently, Lindell had planted a seed in its body. It seems to be a seed that can bloom beautiful white flowers. The great tree grew on the old dragon. It told Hatori, as a sorcerer, she would need a staff. In the future, she should come and take it from its body. It wished her good night. The young dragons were not sad. They praised the old dragon for being amazing. They hoped they could also become such great trees someday. Ariasu told Hatori that it was rare to witness the return of dragons, and this was a very beautiful Bodhi tree. Lindell also told Hatori not to grieve. This is nature, and the dragon's view of life and death. Hatori nodded and said goodbye to the 3 young dragons. Ariasu prepared to leave with Hatori. Hatori reminded herself not to grieve. It was like seeing a kind passerby leave, but she felt dizzy and immediately fell unconscious. Honestly, seeing the old dragon pass away so peacefully, Hatori felt somewhat envious. Hatori had a vague dream, hearing the cries of a cat. In the dream, a woman asked the cat if she could have one of its 9 lives. Then, a man entered the room, and Hatori woke up to find herself resting on Ariasu's lap. Surprised by her own exhaustion, Ariasu informed her that they were on the second leg of their honeymoon, traveling on a train not meant for humans. A peculiar waiter informed them that an envoy wished to see them. It was a black cat that could speak human language. As it greeted Ariasu, it comfortably settled onto Hatori's lap. This black cat had lived 7 lives and stated that cats have 9 lives, growing wiser and more formidable with each life spent, even understanding and ruling as kings. They were expected by a cat king in a village that they entered, populated by many cats. According to the black cat, the area thrived with cats due to the absence of cat abusers and a history of cat lovers. Before Hatori could explore further, a cat named Barney, a patrol guard, jumped into her arms, claiming she smelled like a sorcerer who used to visit. Ariasu pulled the cat away, and Barney cheekily remarked that he wouldn't harm Ariasu's wife, amused that even the cats were aware of their relationship. As Hatori walked deeper into the village, she noticed humans averting their gaze but still catching glimpses of her. The kingdom's ruler was a beautiful long-haired cat with heterochromia named Molly, glad to have a sorcerer visit instead of an illusionist. whom the cats despised for being deceitful and lawless. Molly, aware that they were sent by the church, initially claimed there were no issues, but admitted to recent troubles. As Iriyasu agreed to help, a young girl emerged, asking who Hatori was. With Iriyasu gone and others unable to hear the cat speak, Hatori simply commented on the cuteness of the cats on the wall. Molly was the girl's pet and had watched her grow up, considering her as a daughter. Iriyasu disliked children despite lacking magic. They could see through his true nature, sometimes even identifying his identity. He decided to work in the shadows, sensing an unpleasant presence. Molly led Hatori deep into the forest. Molly shared a story older than its 9 lives about a person who enjoyed killing cats. No cat could escape this fate until the first Cat King and survivors attacked and devoured the abuser, sealing the residuals. Each Cat King's duty was to guard and suppress these remnants. At that moment, strange black smoke wafted from the land in the middle of a forest lake, displeasing Hatori. Molly said it was filth, remnants of souls to be purified. Recently, these remnants have been trying to escape their seal. Both cats and humans could lose their lives to this filth. It must do everything possible to prevent the filth from leaking. Even risking its life for its owner's comfort is fine, as no mother would not want to protect her child. Hatori suddenly remembered her own mother and didn't know what to say. But the next second, she was attacked by someone she had seen in the village. A person in red pushed her into the lake, telling Hatori not to blame her. As Hatori sank, she saw another memory. A woman named Mina was ill in bed with a gray cat. Her husband, Matthew, often brought chrysanthemums home, but the cat was always hostile towards him. Matthew told Mina that an illusionist had arrived in town who might have medicine for her illness. This made Mina feel guilty. Matthew told Mina to rest and stop knitting. Lying in bed, Mina stroked the cat and wished she had 9 lives like it. Hatori heard Mina's voice. This was her sin, enjoying Matthew's love as punishment. She was the core of the filth. The filth clung to her, refusing to leave because of her, turning into such an ugly form. Mina said Matthew was her husband and hoped Hatori would help her. Hatori was awakened by Iriyasu, thankfully unharmed. Barney told Iriyasu that the attacker disappeared instantly. The whole town was filled with magic, as if someone was intentionally obstructing their investigation. Iriyasu wanted Hatori to rest, but needed her to purify the filth, as sealing it only postponed the problem. What was needed was not sealing but purifying magic. Although Hatori had not formally used magic before, Iriyasu believed she could do it. Hatori worried about disappointing Iriyasu, but since Iriyasu had expectations, she was willing to try. Molly agreed to help them drive others away. The purification ceremony was set for the evening, but their conversation was overheard by the attacker and a man with a missing arm. The purification ceremony was complex. Hatori wore robes prepared by Iriyasu and took a bouquet as a makeshift wand. Ariel, unexpectedly, was to assist Hatori with the purification. Although Iriyasu was displeased, Ariel was indeed the most suitable for the ceremony because the wind carries everything away, including flesh, bones, trees, and rocks. Iriyasu did not prepare because he was not adept at purification magic. His essence was shadow, less compatible with purification. Hatori remembered Mina's words. Iriyasu touched her face and told her not to worry, to imagine a strong spring wind dispersing everything from winter. If she prayed in her heart for those things to disappear, Ariel would guide her. He hoped Hatori would love this world. Although the world she once knew might not have been friendly, it was not her enemy. Hatori's task was to unlock the lock with the key. These words were learned from a friend. Hatori asked Iriyasu if he liked this world. After a moment of silence, he replied, yes. Hatori found she could walk on water. She held an incense burner in one hand and a bouquet in the other, stepping towards the filth. She feared disappointing Iriyasu with her failure, yet Mina urged her to help Matthew by ending her life. Hatori didn't understand how their relationship had come to this. The filth was right before her eyes. Ariel reassured her not to worry. Hatori wondered if she could only make the filth evolve. Suddenly, the person who attacked her during the day appeared, grabbing Ariel and taking Hatori hostage. A man with a missing arm stepped forward, claiming the filth was useful and shouldn't be purified by Hatori. Molly was furious. Ariyasu instantly recognized the attacker as an illusionist and noted his particular interest in Hatori. Was Hatori also a crucial experiment? He referred to Ariyasu as the Spear of Division. Ariel warned Hatori not to believe the illusionist, who could capture fairies with his woven gloves and was not a true sorcerer. He claimed fairies had also deceived Hatori. Ariyasu argued that sorcerers do not lie or deceive Hatori, but the illusionist countered that they merely withhold the truth, exploiting a naive child to satisfy curiosity. He urged Ariyasu to reveal the fate of the knight's beloved child, predicting its imminent death. Hatori froze. Was she going to die? The knight's beloved child is a gem that generates unlimited magic but is very fragile and could die if neglected. The kidnapper, named Alice, suggested Ariyasu's interest in Hatori was merely out of curiosity. He labeled Ariyasu a monster in human skin, lacking humanity, and claimed he had locked Hatori with a necklace. As he almost strangled Ariel, Hatori struggled and knocked the illusionist away to save Ariel. Molly and others quickly intervened. Regardless of their words, Hatori declared her loyalty to Ariyasu, the first to buy and shelter her. Even if he lied, as long as Ariyasu held on, she would remain his. Alice and her accomplice were driven back by thorns. Ariyasu licked Hatori's wounds, making her blush. With Ariyasu behind her, Hatori no longer feared the illusionist. She and Ariel decided to purify the filth, with Molly jumping into her arms to witness the event. Touching the black mud, Hatori was transported into a memory. She was in a transparent state, but could see Matthew's past memories. In a tavern, Matthew found a white-haired illusionist accustomed to helping travelers. He sought medicine for his wife. The illusionist noted Matthew's kindness to his wife and agreed to meet her. However, Hatori noticed a sinister smile on his face. After diagnosing, the illusionist requested a private talk with Matthew. The cat stared intently at the room door. The illusionist informed Matthew that Mina could live only a few more years. Unwilling to accept this, Matthew expressed his deep love for his wife and his willingness to do anything for her. The illusionist smirked and mentioned his wife's love for cats, hinting at their 9 lives. Soon, Mina was able to get out of bed. With recent reports of many rats and missing cats in the village, she decided to bring food to Matthew in the forest. Villagers said he was deep in the woods, so she headed there. Hatori had a bad feeling as Mina approached a cabin in the deep forest. Hatori wanted to stop her from entering the cabin, but couldn't, being intangible. Mina opened the door and saw the tortured cats. The whole house was filled with caged cats. Her husband cruelly killed these innocent kittens, telling her that her timing was perfect, as the medicine he had prepared for her was ready. The illusionist had told him that cats have 9 lives, so Matthew used them as materials, thinking it unfair that they supposedly had 9 lives. Mina cried, unable to believe her husband capable of such cruelty, but Matthew insisted he could do it if it was for her. Mina wanted to object, but found herself paralyzed. The illusionist appeared at the cabin door, offering her a drink that would free her from her trapped body and grant her eternal life. However, Mina refused. The illusionist forcibly administered the medicine to her, wanting to use her as his guinea pig. Matthew said it would only hurt at the start, but he never expected his wife to explode into mud before him. The illusionist had anticipated this failure, commenting on the strong curse of the beast. He had never told Matthew the truth, merely using the couple as test subjects and then discarding them. Matthew went insane, thinking he had not killed enough cats, which caused his wife's transformation. He rushed out with an axe and saw the cat she had cared for. Just as he was about to strike, the white cat leaped at him, biting through his throat. The cat, elected king by the cats, declared it would not let him live as he had fallen into and become a demon. The cat owed it to its deceased companions. Matthew did not struggle, having lost his wife. He no longer wanted to live. Tears streamed down Hatori's face. Mina did not want her to witness such a terrible memory. She had only wanted Hatori to eradicate them. Their souls would return to the cycle of life, but like the cursed and slain cats, they had forgotten the way back. They hoped Hatori could eradicate them, but she knew they were merely deceived, not needing destruction. Mina was prepared for destruction, but then Molly spoke up. Its life was nearing its 9th and final end, and it might soon reach its conclusion. Perhaps it could lead these lost souls away. Hatori knew the child who cared for it would be heartbroken. Molly said death comes suddenly and visits every life sooner or later. The kings of cats had always sacrificed their souls to suppress filth. Its role was merely to guide, trivial in comparison, and it had left memories with the child, which was sufficient. At that moment, Hatori thought of flowers. She asked Ariel if she could borrow the power of the wind, like seeds carried away by the wind, which returns everything to the soil. Ariel, impressed by Hatori's wisdom, gladly lent her power. Hatori took Mina's hand, asking her to imagine dandelions scattering. When Mina opened her eyes again, she found herself in a blue field of flowers with someone waiting in the distance. Mina embraced her lover, blessing Hatori, and hoping she would not join them too soon. Hatori felt unwanted, but Ariasu had promised her, unsure when she might die. The one-armed illusionist, Mikhail, called Ariasu a tainted being, neither human nor able to revert to a fairy. Ariasus assured that he would not let Hatori die. He questioned Mikhail about how he came to know of Hatori, as the original auction was confidential. Knowing Mikhail was a human supremacist, Ariasu saw how Alice carefully protected him, and suspected Mikhail's sudden closeness to the tainted was related to his severed arm. By then, Hatori had broken the curse. Ariasu approached her, but Mikhail seemed relieved and left with Alice. He warned Ariasu that many coveted Hatori and knew how Ariasu would treat her afterward. When Hatori asked if they knew each other, Ariasu mentioned that Mikhail had long been infamous for his dislike of sorcerers, likely due to a past conflict with one. Previously, Mikhail's arm was intact, suggesting something had happened since. Mikhail stood in front of Alice, preventing the white-haired illusionist from approaching, while Hatori was weakened from excessive use of magic. Ariasu lifted her, and Hatori asked how long she could live. Ariasu estimated 3 years if nothing was done, but reassured her that his plan did not include her death. It was an experiment to keep her alive. Ariasu was curious about the effects of having the knight's beloved child, who could endlessly store magic, by his side. He acknowledged his vast knowledge and longevity, but admitted difficulty in fully empathizing with humans and fairies, understanding their emotions, but unable to feel them himself. He initially bought Hatori simply because the conditions were favorable. Ariasu thought if he provided everything Hatori needed and cared for her diligently, he might comprehend human emotions. He planned to discuss this when Hatori could not leave, but she saw through his rational words to his innocent eyes and reassured him by touching his face, promising to stay before he asked her to leave. Then she fell into a coma, causing the 3 cats standing on Ariasu's shadow to laugh, surprised by Hatori's confession. Another cat remarked it was clearly out of pity, yet she spoke so rationally. Later, Ariasu brought Hatori home. Silky, who often had a stern face, was anxious when delivering meals. Ariasu took responsibility for feeding Hatori, who had been comatose since returning from Cat Town, and was placed beside a fallen log in a deep forest, surrounded by curious birds. She had been unconscious for about 2 weeks. Ariasu mentioned that Hatori's magical capacity was too large, and even Simon came to inquire, feeling it was risky for Ariasu to let a child do such things. However, Ariasu knew Hatori would wake up eventually. For now, she was merely maintaining bodily functions and absorbing magic while asleep. Just as Simon was about to speak, a team suddenly appeared from the depths of the forest. Leading them was a short elf pulling a small horse, on which sat a beautiful woman with long black hair. Simon was stunned, but Ariasu signaled him to stay quiet. This black-haired woman is Titania, the ruler of a part of Britain and the queen of the fairies. She said that aside from her husband, only Ariasu dared to call her by name. Her husband, being too noisy, had been set aside. The queen noticed Simon and mentioned he smelled like a corrupt invader, stating he was not needed here. With a snap of her fingers, she sent Simon lost into another part of the forest as a minor punishment. The queen expressed a desire to meet Ariasu's wife. By then, Oberon was squatting beside Hatori, commenting on her red hair and potential to be a good sorcerer. Oberon, the fairy king, also teased that Ariasu had learned to be jealous. Oberon, who had always drifted as a shadow, had finally settled down with Hatori as his anchor. He wondered how long Ariasu's facade of affection for only Hatori would last. The queen pulled Oberon away, telling him not to bully the child, as they were here to meet Ariasu's wife. Reluctantly, Oberon agreed to wake Hatori. He summoned the massive magical power of the forest and infused it into Hatori's body. Vines grew around Hatori as she opened her eyes to Oberon's satisfaction. He remarked that the knight's beloved child was most beautiful when her eyes were open and noted her heritage from the bird clan. Surprised, Hatori quickly moved closer to Ariyasu. Oberon, not feeling offended, moved closer to the queen and asked when the two planned to have children, suggesting a blonde child would be delightful. Hatori then realized these two were the king and queen of the fairies. The queen had the elves bite Oberon, who seemed to enjoy it. However, the conversation about children made Hatori look at Ariyasu with a shy and fleeting glance. Suddenly, Ariyasu clutched his chest, strangely mentioning a spasm in his organs. The experienced queen chuckled, finding some use in Oberon's comments. The queen was pleased to meet the new sorcerer and hoped the couple would visit the fairy kingdom. Ariyasu stated they would visit unless they were detained. The fairy queen was non-committal, viewing anyone connected to the night world as her beloved child. However, the guiding elf advised against visiting the fairy kingdom, suggesting that half-humans only bring disaster. Ariyasu understood, so they would not visit on their own initiative. Oberon remarked that the guards were too serious, but they responded that beings with physical bodies had sacrificed too much. Oberon noted that it was a human error, with the innocent always suffering alongside humanity. The queen mused not on whether Hatori and Ariyasu could get along well, but on how many children they might have, clearly optimistic about their future together. Simon finally escaped from the forest and was relieved to see Hatori awake. Seeing how late it was, he hurried back. Ariyasu commented that Simon had been foolish for the past 10 years. Hatori wished she had been bought by Ariyasu 10 years earlier. Ariyasu reassured her that they would spend much more than 10 years together, although Hatori was unsure if the experiment would succeed. Ariyasu then lifted her in his arms, promising success. Upon returning, Silky happily served pudding that she had been preparing since Hatori fell unconscious. The taste instantly conquered her taste buds. Indeed, staying here felt very warm. That's it for this video. See you in the next one. Following the Mina incident, illusionist Mikhail and his disciple fled. The mastermind, a white-haired illusionist, threatened Mikhail using Alice. He criticized Mikhail for failing to even cleanse corruption and warned that his disciple could become an experiment. Alice still doesn't understand why her master listens to such a madman, especially since he had lost an arm. Mikhail told her not to overthink it and secretly vowed to protect Alice. Recently, Hatori also began learning to concoct magic potions under Ariyasu due to her constitution as the knight's beloved child, which endears her to sprites and fairies. When Ariyasu came to check, she had just perfected a potion. A curious little sheep fairy from the elf queen's retinue sniffed it and immediately fell asleep, suggesting the calming potion was too potent and had become a sleeping aid. Since discovering Ariyasu's true nature, he has been seriously teaching her magic. Hatori is learning about cause and effect, understanding which beings to help or avoid, peculiar customs, and age-old legends. Of course, she is also learning to distinguish various potions. Ariyasu took Hatori out to meet the church sprites, also known as black fairy dogs, who guard graveyards and typically don't attack humans unless provoked. Hatori asked why the church was after Ariyasu, who explained he had caused trouble in the past and was noted by the church, but he occasionally helps solve their problems, so they turn a blind eye. Hatori remembered another title used for Ariyasu and realized she still had much to learn about him. Ariyasu pulled out a gift box containing a green ring made by Angelica. The knight's beloved child is prone to early death because their body, like a tree, unconsciously absorbs elements from the air, converting them into magic, which weakens the body. The ring controls the production of magic but only suppresses it. Emotional surges can still trigger magic release. Hatori must remain calm, and Ariyasu is determined to cure her. Angelica included a note for Hatori, advising that the right index finger is for guidance, and it's too early to wear the ring on the left ring finger. Hatori remembered that after resolving the corruption, Ariyasu stopped discussing the matter of a wife, leaving her uncertain about his thoughts. Ariyasu planned to find a familiar for Hatori, which would live off her magic and be very reliable, like Silky at home. A familiar would detect physical issues before the master, suitable for someone reticent like Hatori. Upon arriving at the church with Ariyasu, they found a crowd gathered around a corpse. Ariyasu quickly pulled Hatori away, instructing her to explore the area but stay calm and avoid impulsiveness or looking at the deceased. Hearing the crowd's murmurs, Hatori turned and walked away from the assembly. Hatori unexpectedly ended up in the church graveyard and found it filled with filth. As Ariyasu had been with her for a while, she had let her guard down, leading to her being targeted by the graveyard monsters. She remembered from her childhood that these creatures would take you away if you responded to them. Hatori tried to run, but it was too late. Fortunately, a man with black hair in the graveyard saw her, called her Isabel, and crushed the monster with his bare hands. Hatori realized he wasn't human. She then noticed the man's arm was injured, matching a wound she had seen on a body at the entrance. She hurried to find Ariyasu, thinking of treating the man with her own medicine, but he said she looked like Isabel. Then, he transformed into a black fairy dog in front of Hatori. She saw he was somewhat mad, but given his severe injury, he couldn't move freely. She hugged the black fairy dog to prevent more rash actions. He eventually collapsed. Hatori hadn't noticed that Alice, whom she had met before, was behind her and had already checked the dog's wounds, which were clearly inflicted by someone else, proving the dog was not the culprit. Suddenly, Alice appeared, demanding Hatori hand over the black fairy dog, claiming she wouldn't harm Hatori but needed the dog. Hatori said she wouldn't let go without a good reason, as the dog had saved her life. Alice insisted on taking the dog and was about to act, but Hatori knocked her out with a sleeping potion. Meanwhile, the black fairy dog dreamed of his sister Isabel, a girl with long red hair often maligned by others. He loved her deeply, sleeping on her lap. When he woke up, he found Hatori standing by with Alice covered by a coat. Hatori had lit incense to dispel sprites and asked about his injuries. The dog, Jurek, said he and Isabel were human and that he had watched her grow up. Hatori asked about his injuries, but Jurek was unsure. Alice woke up, surprised to find herself alive and tied up. Faced with her puzzled look, Hatori decided to ask her some questions, such as why she wanted to capture Jurek. After a pause, Alice explained that they needed Jurek for a chimera, a creature created by magically merging various animals. She mentioned that a strange imp had approached her and her master, Mikhail, for help in gathering materials. Mikhail had refused but was threatened. Alice said she didn't care about herself, but didn't want Mikhail to be harmed. She admitted she cared deeply for Mikhail, saying she had been taken in by her master due to her magical talent, despite having no good fortunes in life. Alice confessed she would do anything for her master's sake, though she hadn't expected Ariyasu to have been hiding in Hatori's shadow and listening to everything. Ariyasu glanced at Jurek, realizing he had recently turned into a black fairy dog. Alice asked Ariyasu if he could deal with the strange imp. Ariyasu countered, asking what benefit this would bring him. Alice explained that the imp had unleashed a chimera nearby, and both the bodies outside the church and Jurek's wounds were caused by this chimera. She warned that if they got involved, even her family's cat wouldn't be safe. Unexpectedly, Ariyasu agreed to help. He thought ignoring the problem would only lead to more trouble with the church. He asked Alice about the illusionist imp. Alice admitted she didn't know much. Suddenly, Hatori sensed something was wrong, pushed Alice away, and was then stabbed in the back by vines. A white-haired illusionist appeared, declaring Hatori just an experiment and expendable, claiming Ariyasu had no attachment to humans. Alice looked terrified, recalling Mikhail's warning that Ariyasu was like a sorcerer from fairy tales, sometimes helping humans but also showing his fangs and enjoying pretending to be human. Shocked, Alice watched Ariyasu transform into a monster and protect the injured Hatori. The white-haired illusionist was surprised by Ariyasu's anger, thinking humans were replaceable. Ariyasu tore apart the chimera behind him. Jurek caught Hatori, reminded of his sister Isabel when he saw Hatori's serious injuries. He pressed his forehead against hers, and Hatori saw a memory. Jurek asked Isabel if she had been teased, and she complained about her uncontrollable red hair and eye color. Jurek adored her and often played with her. However, Isabel, distinct in appearance, was ostracized and chased by village children, fleeing into a street and being fatally hit by a passing carriage. Jurek, as a dog, didn't know she had died, thinking she was just asleep, waiting for her to wake up until his life faded. Hatori realized she was crying when she opened her eyes to see Jurek weeping. She comforted him, saying she had woken up. With Jurik's help, Hatori saw Ariasu angry. The white-haired illusionist lamented his lost chimera, not expecting Ariasu to know his name, Catafels, which he hated being called, especially by someone like Ariasu, disguised as a human. As they were about to fight, Hatori hugged Ariasu, and Mikhail held a gun to Catafel's head, mocking him for calling others monsters, then shot him with a bullet designed to prevent regeneration. Ariasu thought Hatori would fear him. As he backed away, saying he would change back, Hatori told him it was fine as it was, joking about not wanting to break the door when returning home. She showed no fear. Ariasu quietly returned to his original form, mentioning Silky would be angry if he damaged the door. Hatori said it was okay, they would just apologize. As Ariasu and Hatori continued, Jurik tugged at Hatori's sleeve, and Mikhail was surprised by Hatori's taste. He scolded his apprentice severely. When he saw the note, he thought he had been abandoned. He told Alice that as a guardian, she must not leave her master's side. Alice then stared at him eagerly. Unexpectedly, Catafels managed to get up. Mikhail questioned Catafels, as it's widely acknowledged that illusionists should not enter a sorcerer's domain. Catafels, why did you attack the fairy? Catafels simply replied, "It's fun. A chimera can merge with a fairy to create a new child, but the fairy's curse is terrifying, so I wanted the illusionist to become the fairy's collar." He turned Isabella's body into a chimera. Jurik instinctively tried to approach, but Hatori stopped him, telling him this was not the Isabella he knew. She recognized Catafels as the illusionist who had deceived Mina and her husband. Facing this villain, Hatori was determined not to let him take Jurik away. Angered, Hatori's magic broke free. She remembered Ariasu saying, "Magic is making what's in your heart tangible, whether turning stone to gold, making fish fly, or keeping crops from rotting. But those things are not to be done." So, Hatori summoned the spider's natural enemies. Catafels remarked that those creatures were too small and would be easily devoured. Ariasu tried to stop the enraged Hatori, but his arm was devoured in the process. Luckily, magic quickly restored it. But they must not twist the rules of the world. Ariasu embraced Hatori, and someone used magic to whisk them away, feeling the chimera's arms break. Sometimes Catafels wondered why he must capture fairies and why he made chimeras, but he could no longer remember, acting only on instinct. The one who took Hatori and the others was a blue fire fairy, commonly known as a will-o'-the-wisp, actually a fairy. Hatori was nervous, feeling she hadn't listened to Ariasu. Ariasu quickly comforted her. Jurik was also very worried about Hatori's condition. The ghostly fairy lent her a small stone, which helped her recover somewhat. The ghostly fairy chided Jurik for acting like a puppy towards the dead, telling him to revert to his original form and complete his mission. He was responsible for chasing grave robbers to the gates of hell as a black fairy dog. Jurik understood that no matter how long he waited, his sister would not return. He sidled up to Hatori and asked if he could stay by her side, offering everything to Hatori. The ghostly fairy was helpless. Although Hatori is the knight's beloved child, how could a fairy actively seek to bond with a human? This was the highest form of shared contract among familiars, sharing emotions and time. If Hatori died, Jurik would also die. Jurik didn't mind, knowing her constitution from the moment he saw her. Hatori asked him if he was no longer waiting for Isabel. At this moment, Catafels, with the chimera, chased after them. Hearing Mikhail call his name, he was angry and wanted to attack, but Ariasu blocked him, and Alice took the opportunity to retaliate, also breaking one of his arms. As for Mikhail's arm, it had already become material for the chimera. He didn't plan to get it back. Jurik didn't want to be taken by Catafels. He preferred to live and die with Hatori. Hatori understood his feelings, having been homeless herself, so she promised not to let Jurik wander alone. She immediately cut her palm and signed a contract with Jurik, giving him a new name, Ruth. Catafels couldn't believe it. Had he been outwitted? Ruth bit into Isabel's corpse to bid farewell to his sister from days past. He was prepared to meet her in reincarnation after his and Hatori's lives ended. Isabel closed her eyes in relief. Catafels regretfully stated that the contract was hard to break, so he simply gave up on Jurik. He did this because he did not want to age and die waiting, as he didn't know when the end would come, which was very painful for him. He also couldn't remember why he had transformed his body in this way. Iriasu commented that this guy was more troublesome than a natural disaster. Cadafal's, known to be cursed with immortality by an ancient deity's child, acted solely on his whims without a clear purpose. Mikhail was coerced into helping find materials. Iriasu warned him to be careful after returning. Meanwhile, Alice stuffed something into Hatori's hand before hastily leaving with Mikhail. The will-o'-the-wisp returned the souls trapped in the chimera's body to the graveyard. Hatori and Ruth went home together. From now on, Ruth's home was Hatori's home, and Hatori's family joyfully welcomed a new member. After returning, Ruth often patrolled around the house and happily pounced on Hatori when he came home. Hatori was very concerned about Ariasu's condition since the church incident, especially since he hadn't left his room for 2 weeks and wasn't eating even the food Silky prepared. Ruth guessed that Ariasu had used too much magical power transforming and told Hatori she could ask him directly if she was worried. Despite her concerns, even Silky noticed something was off and handed Hatori a wallet and coat, pushing her and Ruth out the door to clear her mind. Just at the doorstep, they met Angelica, who had come looking for Hatori. They drove to town together, where Hatori bought many things for the house. Angelica checked a ring and asked if Hatori had been feeling unwell recently. Hatori shook her head, but Ruth betrayed her by revealing that Hatori often felt sleepy, especially after using magic. Angelica advised her not to always think of others, as it could be easy to trip up when alone. She noted that Hatori had high stamina but a fragile heart and should not overexert herself. On the way back, Angelica asked if Hatori wasn't attending school considering her age. Hatori initially thought she could learn at home and felt secure there, but Angelica said this dependency wasn't good. Hatori was young with a long road ahead and shouldn't just get by. She knew about Hatori's past, but insisted that Hatori shouldn't give herself entirely to Iriasu without reservation. Hatori almost lost her temper, but immediately apologized. Angelica wasn't angry, but admitted she might have spoken too harshly. She hoped Hatori wouldn't be too honest. Hatori felt despicable for getting close to those who didn't mind her and thought being abandoned was okay. Yet she didn't want to be abandoned. She saw herself as very selfish. Ruth, sensing her memories and emotions, knew her mother had left her with psychological scars and wanted to help Hatori move forward soon. That evening, Hatori returned home and courageously pushed open Ariasu's door. Ruth didn't react in time, and Hatori was quickly dragged into the room, which was then shut. Ariasu had transformed into a monstrous form and explained that he couldn't control his appearance and could only maintain this shape temporarily. Hatori didn't resist and even felt somewhat reassured. That night, Silky noticed that Hatori didn't come out for dinner and was already sharpening knives outside the door. Meanwhile, Ariasu nearly lost control and almost devoured Hatori in the middle of the night. Hatori dreamed of the words her mother said when she abandoned her. When she awoke, it was already dawn, and only a letter was left on the dresser. Upon leaving the room, she found Ruth had been waiting outside all night. After taking a bath, Hatori asked Silky if she knew where Iriasu had gone. Silky shook her head and handed her a shawl. Then Hatori and Ruth set out to search for Iriasu. Dorsai was surprised to see them, and Ruth, suspicious, shielded Hatori. Dorsai claimed he hadn't seen Iriasu, prompting Hatori to turn around and leave. Ruth told Hatori that she clearly loved Iriasu as she was searching everywhere for him out of concern more than fear. Ruth urged Hatori not to deny it, emphasizing the importance of loving things beyond oneself, much like his love for Hatori and Isabel. "Darn dogs truly are the best companions to their owners," he exclaimed. Soon they came across a garden where an old man was watering plants. Hatori noticed a fairy hanging on the man. The fairy, recognizing Hatori as the knight's beloved child, advised her not to reveal her identity. Ruth recognized the fairy as a vampire that feeds on men's blood and grants them abilities. Typically, such fairies would seek younger men since this old man couldn't withstand her feeding. The fairy curiously looked at Hatori and identified her as Iriasu's lover, to which Hatori corrected that she was just his disciple. Ruth quickly grabbed the fairy, warning her to stay away from Hatori. However, the old man invited Hatori in for tea. Ruth agreed that Hatori needed rest and went out to continue searching for Iriasu, warning the fairy not to harm Hatori, or he would tear her apart. The old man, named Garland, enjoyed reading and writing. He even showed Hatori one of his short romance stories set in a rose garden. After Hatori finished reading, the fairy, leaning against Garland, asked if it was a good story. Hatori nodded, acknowledging that it wasn't the fairy's granted ability, but Garland's own talent. She sensed the fairy hadn't fed on him, because when Garland was younger, the fairy couldn't find a reason profound enough to feed on him or bestow any abilities, leaving her uncertain of her feelings. After Garland woke up, he walked Hatori out, discussing the rose garden from his story. He mentioned having seen a beautiful woman there once. As he looked up, he recognized the fairy standing beside Hatori, reached out, but the fairy had disappeared. They locked eyes again, possibly influenced by Hatori. Just as Hatori began to inquire about the fairy's feelings for Garland, the fairy kissed her, stating that this wasn't the answer she sought. Their kind of fairies express love through blood-sucking and granting abilities, thus she hadn't fallen in love with Garland. After another kiss, she encouraged Hatori to visit again, assuring that Garland would be delighted. Hatori felt unworthy of discussing love. Ruth sent a remote message, informing her that Ariasu was found in the northern forest. Hatori rushed there immediately. She discovered Ariasu soaking in the water and quickly embraced him. Hatori expressed her frustration about him not sharing anything with her, questioning why he had changed and what kind of creature he was. Despite his evasive responses, Ariasu mentioned that Hatori was understanding and accepted whatever he said. Angrily, Hatori retorted that her understanding didn't mean she didn't care about him and that she wanted to know more about him. Surprised by her expression, Ariasu seriously explained that he had left a note. Hatori showed disdain for the note, concerned about how she could be at ease with such a message if he suddenly disappeared. Ariasu promised to organize some information before sharing more about himself. Hatori reluctantly agreed to wait. Beside her, Ruth sighed, feeling they were being deceived again. As Ariasu noticed Hatori seemed upset, he was about to inquire when something fell from the sky, hitting him on the head. A dolphin-like sprite climbed onto Hatori's head, revealing itself to be Lindel's familiar, sent to invite Hatori to the dragon's realm. The familiar explained that Lindel heard about Hatori's limited magic skills and wanted to craft a wand for her that could convey a sorcerer's intentions to neighbors. It also mentioned that only Hatori was invited because Lindel wanted to spend time with his granddaughter, finding Ariasu a nuisance. Shocked, Hatori wondered if Ariasu was Lindel's son. Ariasu agreed to let Hatori go alone, causing her some panic. Ruth quietly spoke up, insisting on accompanying her. The dragon that arrived was one of the 3 young dragons that had grown fond of Hatori and had grown large enough for her to ride. Early in the morning, Silky prepared a packed lunch for Hatori. Hatori quickly grabbed her items, and along with Ruth, donned a cloak. They mounted the dragon, led by the familiar Selkie. Glancing at Ariasu one last time, Hatori said nothing. Selkie used invisibility magic. Being a sea dweller, she could transform into both seal and human forms. After applying a misty protective layer, the dragon swiftly crossed the clouds, bringing them to Iceland where Lindel awaited. Meanwhile, Ariasu watched from afar, concerned for Hatori. Lindel, noticing Ruth, commented on Hatori finding a good family member. Lindel also boasted about buying clothes on the street, making himself look handsome, which made Hatori laugh, noting the similarity to Ariasu. Lindel introduced Hatori to a reindeer pulling a cart and explained that the dragon's realm was a sanctuary formed hundreds of years ago by the first steward who gathered the world's remaining dragons. Lindel, originally a nameless nomad, received his name from his master. Lindel led Hatori and the others under a Bodhi tree and handed her a saw, telling her he was going to cook and that she should saw some wood herself. Hatori slipped and fell, but luckily Ruth caught her in time and scolded her harshly. Selkie commented that Ruth was overreacting, as a fall wouldn't kill her. Hatori thought about making her own wand and climbed up again after taking off her coat. After Hatori left, Ariasu was distracted. Although Hatori usually didn't talk much, her absence made the house feel unusually cold. Then he received a letter from a small bird, sent by Adolf from the Academy management. Adolf wanted to discuss Hatori's future as a human with Ariasu. That evening, Hatori tasted Lindel's cooking, and he also healed a scrape on her hand. His hands were known as healing hands, capable of curing anything non-fatal. Such people used to be more common, but had become rare over the past centuries. Curious, Hatori asked Lindel how long he had lived and if other sorcerers also had long lives. Lindel was shocked, realizing Ariasu hadn't told Hatori anything. Hatori admitted she hadn't asked. Lindel mentioned he called Hatori over because he was worried about her. as Ariyasu seemed to be trying to tame her like a reindeer, yet she seemed to accept it. Hatori confessed that her mother had once said she wished Hatori hadn't been born. Her mother had fled from her, then died, and Hatori believed her father and brother probably also wanted to escape from her. Only Ariyasu kept her by his side, so she never touched on topics Ariyasu didn't want to discuss, always obedient. Lindell didn't see it that way. He decided to tell Hatori a story and punish the one who made her sad. The story began long before the Industrial Revolution and the surge of oil. Sorcerers had long realized they were different from ordinary people, able to see spirits and perform miracles, sometimes living much longer than humans, possibly as their fated destiny. Some couldn't accept this and sought reasons, wondering if they had been given a mission. Many fellows fell while searching for their origins. During such a time, Lindell couldn't accept this reality. While searching for his origins, wolves appeared around him, but Lindell didn't see them. Instead, he found Ariyasu, who looked monstrous and was attacked by the wolves. Ariyasu said he was hungry and then fell unconscious. Lindell took him in and asked where he came from. Ariyasu didn't know, waking up in the forest, always avoiding humans and exhausted by the time he reached this place. Lindell thought he was clearly a spirit but had a human body. Unsure of what Ariyasu really was, he decided to take him to meet his master, and it was then that Ariyasu first learned about sorcerers. Lindell used magic to find his master's direction in front of Ariyasu. In thick fog, he led Ariyasu walking on water. Ariyasu looked around curiously. Lindell teased him, urging him to taste the seawater. They reached a seaside cabin where a woman with dark skin, resembling a research scholar, emerged. She was Lindell's master, Rahab. Rahab often criticized Lindell for not communicating with others, yet was surprised he had brought back Ariyasu. She commented on Ariyasu's tall stature, suggesting he take on a human form, which caused Ariyasu to subconsciously transform into a child. Rahab examined him and found his nature closely aligned with elves and fairies, though mixed with some human elements. She suggested that a human cursed might be simpler, but Ariyasu's case seemed the opposite. When asked about his memories before wandering, Ariyasu recalled only redness. They did not press him to remember. Rahab assigned Lindell to take care of Ariyasu, saying it was time he took an apprentice. She did not insist on Lindell being friendly towards his enemies, but noted that their neighbors were harming them. Guiding the lost is a sorcerer's duty. Lindell remarked that it wasn't about wanting to be loved, either for him or Rahab. Rahab mentioned that curses and blessings are essentially the same, depending on one's perspective. Ariyasu, not wanting to cause trouble, prepared to leave, but the proud Lindell ultimately kept him, treating him like someone familiar. Ariyasu did not understand the purpose, so Rahab defined him as family, warmly giving him a name and a necklace, encouraging him to slowly find answers. Lindell snapped back to reality as Mikhail intercepted a message from a small bird, warning Ariyasu that if Hatori continued this way, living together might end disastrously. Was not Hatori now as lost as Ariyasu once was? After the bird from Mikhail had gone, Ariyasu fell into contemplation while Lindell's story to Hatori continued. Ariyasu, now named, lived with Lindell, chasing reindeer in the snow-capped mountains through all seasons. Occasionally, despite not eating rabbits, Ariyasu would still catch them, making Lindell realize he might be lacking something. Though smart, Ariyasu seemed more like an observer. As their food supply dwindled, Lindell took Ariyasu to a human village to exchange healing for food. They encountered a child with a fever. Lindell intended to use his own medicine, but the child could see Ariyasu hiding in Lindell's shadow, leading the villagers to accuse Lindell of kidnapping. The villagers attacked, and seeing Lindell hurt, Ariyasu intervened. Sensing danger, Lindell swiftly used magic to transport them elsewhere, but they had to leave quickly. Lindell was fading, but Ariyasu carried him and, using Lindell's previous methods, found a way out. When Lindell awoke, Ariyasu was already cooking, remarking he might have eaten people before. Upon hearing this, both Lindell at the time and Hatori hearing the story now were shocked. Lindell asked Hatori how she felt about Ariyasu, who might have eaten humans. Hatori recalled a night when Ariyasu almost attacked her. She revealed she could see monsters from a young age, many of whom discussed the sensation of eating humans. Although she was very scared then, she was never afraid of Ariyasu. She was about to express this when Lindell stopped her and suggested she tell Ariyasu directly. He wanted Hatori to maintain this attitude and talk with Ariasu. Lindell had responded to the question himself by joking that he looked tasty and warned Ariasu to be careful not to eat him. Ariasu was shocked and quickly assured he would not, although he confessed he sometimes had urges to eat humans despite his reluctance. Lindell noted that many creatures eat humans and that he would not shun or fear Ariasu for this. Instead, he suggested Ariasu eat other things to forget the taste of humans. Hatori was relieved that now Silky was taking care of their home. Lindell described humans as more fearful and cruel than any creature. He advised Ariasu to keep this matter to himself, although he was uncertain what Ariasu really thought. Lindell noted that Ariasu still had the mind of a child, and Hatori wondered if she looked appetizing to him and what would happen if she asked about something Ariasu did not want to discuss. The next day, Hatori was washing her face by the lake when a dragon that liked her knocked her into the water, where she spotted a beautiful long dragon. She happily shared this with Ruth. Later, Lindell cut her hair, explaining that it harbored magical power suitable for a wand core. Hatori's rare red hair was particularly attuned to magic, symbolizing the earth's colors of flowing flame and blood. Lindell offered her several handle choices, with fire sprites drying the wood. The wand had no specific shape, and Lindell let Hatori carve it herself, assisting with the finishing touches. Carving the wand also allowed for self-reflection, a tradition among sorcerers. Hatori was unsure how to converse with herself. Ruth stayed by her side as she pondered her own matters for the first time and began carving the wand. Lindell instructed the dragons not to disturb her. That evening, he reminded her it was time to rest, estimating the wand would be finished the next day. Lindell asked Hatori to wait a little longer as the land would bloom with flowers that night, nurturing and loving its fairies. Lindell's title is Song of the White Flower. For sorcerers or illusionists, the name holds great significance. Lindell's spells are sung, and his singing makes the sprites dance. He invited Hatori to join in. Singing originated before language, early in ancient times, and magic has always been with Hatori, usable as long as she can imagine. While admiring the scenery, Hatori wondered if Ariasu could see it too. To her surprise, she saw Ariasu's reflection in the water. Ariasu was astonished. How could Hatori use the water mirror magic? He guessed it was because Lindell was singing, thus connecting the magic. Hatori noticed Ariasu looked troubled. He confessed that without her, home felt cold and dull. Hatori mentioned she had heard a story about him from Lindell, and she would share her untold stories with him and return after finishing her wand. Lindell felt like he was raising a child. Unbeknownst to Hatori, her home had grown especially cold in her absence, lacking even a fire. After Hatori left, Ariasu was downhearted. Despite many tasks in summer, he lacked motivation. Initially, he thought of Hatori as a merely nominal apprentice, brought for observation. However, Hatori's unique physique and her candid and close demeanor surprised him, although she spoke little at that time. Hatori also dreamed of Ariasu. When she woke up, her wand was finished. Lindell explained that she fell asleep because the creation consumed her magic, and the wand contained this magic. He was finishing the wand and mentioned that Ariasu should have taught her this knowledge. Hatori admitted she didn't ask Ariasu to avoid bothering him, but Lindell reassured her that caring for a fledgling was not a bother, recalling Ariasu had once troubled him too. Lindell rated Hatori's intuition higher than Ariasu's. Lindell pulled out 2 blue gems from his bag, gifts from a friend, bathed in sunlight and moonlight at the lake's bottom for 1,000 years. He used these gems as eyes on the wand and resumed his blessing song. Hatori's cut hair was also incorporated into the wand, turning it red. Hatori, swinging high in the air with the wand, saw an old dragon behind her. The old dragon told her that through the wand, they were connected by a thread. This place was a junction for travelers and those ending their journeys, a meeting point of 2 worlds. The dragon saw what was in Hatori's world. It told her she often looked unhappy but could be open here, as it was the only dragon. Hatori admitted her greed. Initially indifferent to being abandoned, she chose not to rely on Ariasu. Seeing him indifferent comforted her, even if it was pretend. Ariasu still called her family. However, she grew discontent and lonely when she realized Ariasu kept secrets from her. She wanted to keep her feelings for Ariasu indifferent so that she wouldn't feel dissatisfied. She was prepared to not mind even if abandoned. The old dragon asked Hatori if Ariasu had ever said he would abandon her at any time, or if the worries she had were actually ever realized. Hatori shook her head, and the old dragon advised her not to worry too much. Hatori was concerned that it might happen in the future. She feared she would quickly be disliked because of her mother, leaving her with a psychological shadow. However, the old dragon expressed gratitude towards Hatori's parents. Normally, when animals cannot survive, they abandon or even kill their young because they can just have more. But Hatori's mother had let go instead of strangling Hatori. Despite crying out that she wished she had never given birth to her, and she ultimately chose suicide, the dragon noted that Hatori's arrival allowed it to fly in its final moments and purified Mina's family and the cats because of her. It said that by belittling herself, Hatori was also dismissing those she had saved. Hatori said she never thought that way, but felt she had just unintentionally done some things. The dragon responded that she should still be proud of her actions since those lives were saved because of her, and they were grateful to her parents for raising her. The dragon told Hatori she was free. Even if she carried a curse for life and fell because of it, her future was hers to decide. It hoped Hatori would live not for others, but by following her own heart. Hatori's wand was also the dragon's wand. No matter where she was, it would light her path. She could go anywhere she wanted. The dragon urged Hatori to speak her mind immediately because words lose their fragrance over time. Lindell saw Hatori daydreaming and was surprised to hear she had met the old dragon. Hatori thanked him for his hospitality but said she had to return immediately. Lindell, surprised yet seeing her determination, no longer asked questions and smiled reassuringly, offering to call a flying dragon for her. But at that moment, Ruth brought Hatori's backpack. Following Lindell's advice, Hatori used magic, which the fire sprites loved, and they immediately appeared to help her transform into a phoenix and fly away. Lindell was left sitting on the ground, surprised by her resilient and bold personality, akin to a phoenix rising from ashes. Hatori flew home and was caught by Ariasu. Unsure how to explain, she was embraced by him, who was glad she had returned. Just as she was about to speak, she found herself too tired from the magic-intensive flight from the dragon's realm. Hatori had more to say, but fell asleep. Silky immediately rushed out with a blanket. Ariasu, holding her hand, didn't hear what she wanted to say, but felt the warmth. Hatori had another dream. As a child, she told her mother about monsters in the alley, which frightened her. Her mother wasn't surprised and told her not to be afraid of them because showing fear would only draw them closer. Her father carried her on his shoulders, promising to keep those creatures at bay as long as he was there. Her parents praised her for being brave at that time. Her mother was pregnant with her unborn brother. It was a rare dream where her mother neither cried nor got angry. Upon waking, Hatori noticed many lambs outside her window. Ruth said he couldn't help chasing them if they stayed. Seeing Hatori awake, Silky also felt relieved. Ariasu downstairs greeted Hatori as well. Hatori found it incredible that, not long ago, she couldn't imagine living in such a warm place, but now she was starting to accept everything about herself. The knots in her heart haven't unraveled yet. Let's see what a mess you two can become.